Good day, and thank you for joining us today as we present, along with our friends from the Council for Federal Cannabis Regulation. Today, we're welcoming two special guests from the FDA to discuss cannabis science, policy, and regulation. Before we begin, we need to cover a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them to the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. You can do that at any time. Your questions will only be seen by the presenters. You'll find some answers to common technical issues located in the Help widget at the bottom of your screen. And probably importantly, for many of you, a PDF of today's presentation is available in the resource widget on your page. You can go there and download it for future reference. And with that out of the way, I'm Jack Jacobson. I'm an advisor at Thompson Coburn and an advisor to the Council for Federal Cannabis Regulation. To start us off today, I'd like to welcome the founder and board chair of CFCR, Sherry Orlowitz, who has some opening remarks. Sherry?
Thank you so much, Jack, and good afternoon, everyone. We are so pleased here at CFCR to welcome the FDA and Dr. Janet Woodcock, the Principal Deputy Commissioner, and Dr. Cornier, the Cannabis Products Committee lead. We're proud to bring this first conversation with FDA to the cannabis industry stakeholders to preview today the regulatory journey that this industry is about to take. We are here. Federal regulation is to begin in earnest, and this is for real. To paraphrase Dr. Woodcock, when I spoke with her last week, we are not kicking the can down the road. We want to get to action. A moment to explain the work of the Council. We're a volunteer group of former federal corporate policy, science, DEI, and cannabis industry leaders working on behalf of the consumer to bring the FDA regulators together with stakeholders of the cannabis industry to work together respectfully to create a safe and accessible and brand new industry in the United States. We recognize that the U.S. government has spent over $1 billion with NIDA, concerned about the abuse of cannabis, without ever having the opportunity until now to start understanding the medicinal and benefits of cannabis, and to normalize cannabis within the confines of the existing law. CFCR does not look to change the law. That is the work of many of our partner organizations. But rather, we work with regulators to develop the law as it is today in the form of regulations that recognize the legitimacy of cannabis. As an example, our partners today are looking to deschedule cannabis on the tail of our president's, what I would remark as a courageous speech. CFCR does not in any way contest the notion that cannabis is capable of abuse. So therefore, we do not see descheduling in the future, but we do see the potential for rescheduling. So many of those scheduled, so many of the drugs on Schedule 3 and Schedule 4, such as Valium and Ritalin, we all know are and have been abused. And our job here at the Council is to develop the scientific and policy arguments to reschedule below a 2 and to defang 280E and develop a healthy industry. Thank you, Jack. And I can't wait to hear.
And thank you, Sherry. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Chase. I'm the Executive Director of CFCR, and we're extremely excited about today's guests and topics. So let's get started. We encourage all of you who are watching and participating today to ask a lot of questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. So please use the Q&A widget to submit your questions, and there's a chat function too, but please use that Q&A widget for the questions for our guests. And also, as a reminder, members of the press, please submit your questions directly to the FDA press office, and I will drop the link for the email for Courtney Rhodes, who is our press officer, into the chat for you momentarily. But today, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Janet Woodcock, who's the Principal Deputy Commissioner of FDA. And Dr. Woodcock, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your new role within FDA?
Certainly. Hello, folks. I'm Janet Woodcock. As the principal deputy commissioner, I'm obviously the son and backup for the commissioner, but right now I'm working very extensively on the food regulatory program, which is undergoing, a deep review. I'm also executive lead for the Cannabis Product Committee that Patrick Cornwallis chairs. And so it's in that capacity that I'm talking to you today. But of course, I've had a very long experience of being running different parts of FDA over the years, including being the deputy director over in CBER and heading the Center for Drugs for a long time. So I have a fair amount of experience with product regulation.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Woodcock. It's a pleasure to have you here today. And now, please welcome Dr. Patrick Cornwallis, Science and Policy Coordinator for FDA's Cannabis Product Committee. Welcome, Dr. Cornwallis. Could you explain for our audience what the CPC is and some of your responsibilities within FDA?
Certainly, yeah. So the CPC, the Cannabis Product Committee, is a group of people throughout the agency whose work touches upon cannabis. And what the CPC does is serves as a coordination between all of those people and all of those functions to develop and implement cohesive strategy agency-wide about cannabis.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Dr. Cornwallis. And with that, we'd like to turn this webinar over to our guests who have a presentation that's prepared for all of you. And then afterward, we'll get as many of your questions in as possible. Again, we're going to start with the questions that were submitted when you were registered. The questions that you're submitting now, we'll try to populate through, and we do have an end time of 2 o'clock today. But if we don't get through all of your questions, we will log them and make sure that they're presented to our guests later on. So thank you very much. And with that, Dr. Woodcock, Dr. Cornwallis, take it away.
All right, Dr. Woodcock, are you ready to get started with the section about drugs from cannabis?
I am. I'm sorry. Yes, I am just muted. This is a little different. So, hi, everyone. I would like to, before I talk about drugs from cannabis, I would really like to sort of set the stage here. We in the federal government, is true, I do not believe in kicking the can down the road, but looking at the questions that are coming in already, we are not going to announce any new policies or decisions on this webinar. We're going to give you the framework of what we have learned, what we're thinking, what we feel about these different compounds in some different pathways that they might take or are taking. We hope this will provide a very comprehensive background, and some of the questions that you're asking, we would hope could be addressed in the future, hopefully as soon as possible. But we don't announce new decisions or policies. This way we put them out for the public, and we are still working on making those decisions. Now, of course, one of the things that everyone is focused on is the president's announcement, and we will talk about that at the end. Of course, we are working diligently on looking at the scheduling of marijuana under the Controlled Substance Act, and what flexibilities we might have there. So that is a very high priority that the Secretary of HHS is very interested in. We're working closely with our partners at NIDA and also at the Assistant Secretary for Health. We'll be talking about that a little bit. So why don't I move on? But first, I'm going to talk about, so I see some of the questions are about drugs from cannabis. So why don't we start there? Then we're going to talk about really the Farm Bill and what it did with hemp and CBD and other cannabinoid compounds and the challenges we find there. We're going to cover some additional topics. Then we'll talk about our marijuana scheduling review. So, the FDA regulates different products based on the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and different provisions in it. But these products are defined. They're defined as food, drugs, biologics, devices, veterinary products, tobacco products, for example. So we don't regulate just any products. They have to kind of fit into these categories. And we have, of course, extensive programs that address each type of these commodities. And so under the Farm Bill did not abrogate the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So any product, including something from cannabis, hemp, or otherwise, that is that meets the definition of a drug, which is written here, is considered to be a drug. Okay, so if it attended to affect the structure or function of the body, okay, or treat, mitigate, prevent, et cetera, disease. And generally speaking, certainly a new drug has to be approved by the FDA before it can be put into interstate commerce. And that's the scheme we have in the United States for therapeutic medicinals. And the Center for Drugs regulates the prescription and non-prescription drugs, including the generic drugs, and they're evaluated basically for three properties: safety, efficacy, whether they work beneficially or not, and quality. And the criterion for approval of a drug is that the overall demonstrated benefits outweigh its known risks, and that the risks have been assessed by all tests reasonably applicable, so we know something about the risks. And the Center for Drugs works to make sure that drugs are available. So it isn't just, we're not just a funnel, but we really work with developers because there are so many unmet medical needs. And we, after they're in the market, we make sure that they continue to have the positive benefit risk analysis. Now, cannabis drugs are drugs, some of them, and if they have, they claim a therapeutic benefit, that means they're drugs currently. And so generally, people submit an IND, and I see there have been questions about that in the chat, and they can request a pre-IND meeting. Oops. I'm not sure why this is jumping around. There we go. They can request a pre-IND meeting to discuss. And of course, we know now that currently cannabis being in Schedule I, it's very, very difficult to do studies. And drug sponsors can then ask for an approval once they've done all their clinical work and all their other work and submitted an application, a new drug application. And so when they're put in a clinical trial as a new investigational new drug, the cannabis-derived compounds or cannabis products have to have the pharmacology and toxicology studies, which generally they're for safety, okay, demonstrate safety. And for cannabis and related compounds, they would undergo abuse liability testing, manufacturing information, and clinical protocol, and the criteria, the credentials of the investigators. So 4 products have actually gone through this that are related to cannabis. And they've had to, when these products are approved, they have to go through a scheduling activity with DEA, and they've been rescheduled upon approval. So because the Schedule I criterion is accepted medical use, and once the FDA approves these, they obviously have accepted medical use, therefore they're eligible rescheduled into one of the other schedules of the CSA. So Marinol or dronabinol is a synthetic delta-9 THC, and I was involved in this when it was approved for nausea, for cancer chemotherapy, anorexia from HIV, infection is Schedule 3. And others, we have that are similar, Schedule 2 for dronabinol, and Epidiolex is for, as you know, is for CBD, different cannabinoid for childhood seizures, tuberous sclerosis complex. These are serious illnesses. Originally, it was put in Schedule 5, but is now not scheduled. that's part of, right now, that's how cannabis-related products or any product with a relationship to abuse liability or had previously been scheduled would go through this process. So that means we treat products that have cannabis or cannabis-derived compounds like we would any other FDA-regulated product. Means they're subject to the same authorities as any other substance. And for drugs, long ago, we did botanical policy so that botanicals actually can be approved by the FDA. We have approved a number of them as drugs. It focuses on control the quality, like growing, and it focuses on the potency of the lead active ingredients and making sure those are controlled. But we can develop and get botanical products approved. They don't have to be single synthesized entities. And I would refer you to that guidance for further information if you're interested. And then, the agency put out a draft guidance document on cannabis and cannabis-derived compounds and quality considerations for clinical research. So, this is really how to try to control and measure and control the botanical to make sure it is of uniform potency and quality. So we've tried to help developers, although we recognize that the DEA-related requirements based on Schedule I make this very difficult. However, we've had over 800 INDs, and we received over 400 of those in the first 40 years and 400 in the last 10 years. So there's been quite an increase in interest in research studies and drug development studies of cannabis. And of course, right now we have about 150 active INDs, and you can see they're in the areas that you would expect based on we've made neurologic approvals for CBD, and then addiction and pain medicine, obviously, and so forth. So we'll hope that some of those will bear fruit. If they do, they would, the drug development ones could go through and get an FDA approval. So in summary, there's a well-defined role where we do drug development, where people are interested in developing a cannabis product or cannabis-derived product, as a drug and going through the standard pathway. We continue to try to help with this also into understanding human animal uses and safety of non-drug cannabis products, because we recognize that not all products will go through this development pathway. And so we want to also continue protect public health with respect to these different products, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, because of course we're agnostic in general about cannabis, but products that are contaminated with heavy metals or pesticides, products that are mislabeled as far as their content or overdose and so forth, and so forth. These are products where we need to take action. So I will turn it over to Patrick for the next section.
All right, thank you. So Dr. Woodcock presented about our existing drug pathway and that it's open to therapeutics developed either from hemp that's been descheduled or from marijuana that's still scheduled. What I'm going to talk about now is the regulatory challenges that we're facing with regard specifically to hemp, so the things that were descheduled with the 2018 Farm Bill. So what the Farm Bill did is it carved out a large chunk of what used to be marijuana, and so that is hemp. And hemp is the cannabis sativa plant and its derivatives that contain no more than 0.3% delta-9 THC on a dry weight basis. So that's actually quite a lot. And but the Farm Bill did note that hemp, no longer scheduled hemp, is still subject to regulation by FDA. But of course, only in the areas where FDA regulates, right? So drugs, foods, dietary supplements, and so on. So that first slide showed the different types of commodities that FDA regulates. So FDA will be regulating hemp products, does regulate hemp products insofar as they are one of those categories. CBD is a hemp product, and so that was part of what was descheduled. And it is a very large market. So we're looking at a $4 billion+ market, and that market is predicted to continue growing, of course, depending on the regulatory framework to some extent, but it is a large market. And CBD products, hemp-derived CBD products, come in a really wide variety of formats. So this slide shows the types of products in, I would say, market or industry parlance. These are the sectors of the CBD market. Tinctures, capsules, gummies, beverages. These are things that are ingestible. There are things that are inhalable, like flower, pre-roll, and vapes. And there are things that are topical, things that fall into the personal beauty care and topical category. And in addition to that, there's also the approved drug, Epidiolex. And so you can see and probably can imagine that some of these product types fit pretty well under an FDA-regulated commodity, some of them not so clearly. So this already presents itself as a bit of a challenge to FDA regulation when it's not always clear exactly which FDA-regulated product type a product will fit under. Sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's less clear. So why are people using CBD products? This is a very small sample size. This is FDA data, but we included it here because it's indicative of broad patterns. So these are when we've received adverse event reports. This is what the users have self-described as their reason for using CBD. You see up on top are pain, insomnia, and anxiety. So people are using it to help them sleep, to deal with anxiety for calming effects, and to some extent pain. And these three top usage categories are what we see often in other research that we've gained access to. So we are looking at a wide variety of sources. So it's not only CBD that's an important type of thing that people are interested in from hemp. There are other minor cannabinoids where interest is growing, some being cannabigerol, cannabinol, cannabichromene. So while CBD is the biggest one and it's the most prevalent one in the plants, there are other growing markets for minor cannabinoids. So one of the main focuses of the regulatory situation surrounding CBD is the statutory provisions in the Act. So these are parts of the law that make it not allowed to put certain active pharmaceutical ingredients into foods and into dietary supplements. Since CBD is the active in a FDA-approved drug, Epidiolex, the law automatically excludes it and doesn't allow it to be put into foods and dietary supplements. So this was identified right away as a barrier for the whole CBD market insofar as these products are marketed in foods and dietary supplements. So right away with the Farm Bill passing in 2018, it raised the question, what do we do about this? What does the industry do about this since they're facing an immediate legal barrier even after the Farm Bill descheduled hemp? So the head of the FDA at the time, Commissioner Gottlieb, said, oh, I missed one point. The law also gives the agency the authority, the power to change that by issuing a regulation. So the big question was, will the FDA do that? So the commissioner at the time, Commissioner Gottlieb, stated that FDA would only consider doing so if the agency could determine that all other requirements in the Act are met. The big one there is essentially boils down to, is CBD safe enough to put into foods and into dietary supplements? One of the biggest requirements in the Act is the safety-related one, the safety standard. So the real question here is CBD safe enough to put into foods and dietary supplements? If yes, only then would the agency engage in this rulemaking process to do away with these rules about, or these provisions about pharmaceutical ingredients in foods and dietary supplements. So that's the big question. And to tackle that, Commissioner Gottlieb established in 2018 the CBD Policy Working Group. Now that has merged with the marijuana working group, and now is the Cannabis Product Committee, which Dr. Woodcock and I lead. So again, that question is, can CBD meet the safety standards for food and dietary supplements? So we've been working since 2018 on that question. So we've been busy actually since 2018. I think people view us as not having been very active since that time, but internally we've been very active. So I will list some of the ways that we've been collecting information since. I'll note that at the time, the big message of the agency was we need more data. We need more information to answer this question. And we've been actively seeking it out. So I'll summarize a lot of the different information that we've accumulated. So we held a public meeting in May of 2019 to obtain information and to obtain stakeholders' views. Over 100 people presented, and we have a public docket where anyone can submit information to us, and we've received over 4,300 public comments. The docket remains open as a testament to our interest in obtaining any and all information that we can. And so if folks have any information they would like to submit to the agency, that public docket is still an avenue for that. We've also identified a lot of scientific questions, and we posted a list of them in the Federal Register along with the announcement of that public docket. And there's a long list of scientific questions that we have. When we've looked at the toxicology profile, the scientific information, we've identified a lot of red flags. This is a very bioactive compound, which is not surprising for an approved drug that has the effect that we know it has. And that raises a lot of questions, and I'm not going to read them all here, but this has been discussed in the scientific literature. We're also trying to get a handle of what the products on the market really look like. What's in them, what are the potential contaminants, what are the potential issues in terms of truth in labeling, what's in them. So we've analyzed a good number of products on the market right now, and we're in a second phase of that now, where we're looking at approximately 1,400 samples that we've acquired from the market and are analyzing them for a wide range of constituents. This paper was published based on some of our preliminary work, but there should be more of that to come. We're obtaining information about the market and the usage. So some of that is available in the public scientific literature. We're also working with market research firms to obtain some of that information through that avenue as well. So we're trying to get our hands on as clear of a picture of what the market's like and how people are using these things as possible. We've also recognized that we've got some scientific questions that may or may not be addressed in the public domain or by companies. And so we're undertaking a series of toxicological studies internally to try to address these. So on the left are a list of ongoing studies right now. On the right, you can see a publication that's already come out. I was a co-author on that study. And this study is looking at the effects of CBD and its metabolites. So the metabolites of CBD are different between different animal species, and that's one of the data gaps that we have. So at this study, testicular cells from humans and from mice have been treated with CBD and CBD metabolites in order to ascertain which molecule is causing these toxic effects on these cells, and whether mice and humans are the same or different in that regard. And actually some of the abstract there shows that the human cells were actually a little more sensitive to CBD than the mouse cells, which raises some hypotheses or questions about safety. We also are receiving adverse event data on various cannabis-related products, and we're tracking these, and we're reporting some of these at meetings and such. And this is just a subset, an example of some of the types of adverse events we're tracking, trying to keep our finger on the pulse of how these products are affecting people. We're closely monitoring the scientific literature. There's a lot of scientific literature. I think one of the messages that's come out of the agency is that we need more data. There's not a lot of data about CBD. There's actually a good bit of data. And this is stuff that's come to our attention. And we're actively monitoring and watching the ever increasing amount of publicly available data about CBD, about other cannabis products. We're very keen on improving our understanding in real time of cannabis products on the public health And so we issued in October of 2021 a plan to, in many different ways, boost our real world data monitoring and our access to various types of data to, again, make sure that we have a full understanding of the impacts as it's evolving of cannabis on public health. So we've done all of these things, and we've learned quite a bit about the risk profile of CBD. And what we found is that it does raise a lot of safety questions. Like I said, it's a very bioactive molecule. It's only a tiny bit different from THC molecularly. And it's a powerful approved drug, right? It's the basis for Epidiolex, which has had very dramatic effects on people's lives and who suffer from these seizure disorders. So we know that CBD can cause liver injury, or at least cause signs of liver injury. We know that CBD can have drug interactions. And importantly, we've seen in the scientific literature that CBD can impact the reproductive system, particularly the male reproductive system, in many different ways. And this has been shown in species ranging from invertebrates to mice to monkeys. We've also been taking targeted actions, trying to target the products that pose the most immediate risks to public health with enforcement. We've issued warning letters for a wide range of reasons related to public health, particularly products that are marketed to treat serious diseases, products intended for food-producing animals. There's evidence that CBD can transfer into food through animals and through their food. We've issued warning letters for food products that contain CBD. From the information we've seen, we cannot conclude that CBD is generally recognized as safe, and that's what we've included in certain warning letters. We've issued warning letters towards products with concerning routes of administration, and to Delta-8 THC products, which I'll cover in a few slides. So we know that CBD and cannabinoids raise serious scientific and regulatory challenges. That's what we do know, and in particular with long-term use and for vulnerable populations. And I'll also note that as much as we've learned a lot in our time looking at CBD, other cannabinoids are much more poorly understood. So now looking at the pathways, again, with the first slide that Dr. Woodcock showed, the FDA has control, has authority, can protect public health only in products that are FDA regulated commodities. And so three of the pathways that rise to the top in terms of cannabis products are drugs, dietary supplements, and food ingredients. So the amount of tools that we have to manage risks are different for each of these product types. So with drugs, it's a very subset of the population that's using drugs, and it's a risk benefit. So it's clear that there can be risks with approved drugs, but it's that they're outweighed by the benefits at treatment. There are a lot of data that go into a drug approval, and there's a lot of risk management options that are available as well. So this is a very controlled environment where the agency can help people manage their risk and improve their health. Dietary supplements, on the other hand, have a different safety standard where you can't, if something's risky, it can't be offset by a potential benefit. And there's a lot less data that goes into getting a dietary supplement on the market, and there's a lot less tools for managing that risk. Now, in the third column, food ingredients, rather than having it be a subset of people that are seeking this out on purpose, food is eaten by everyone, including vulnerable groups. So there's no real way to pick and choose who's getting exposed to a food product, unlike the previous examples of product categories. And I want to emphasize this, the safety standard, that's by law. This isn't something that we're subjective about or that we decide, right? This is a safety standard that's very, very strict, and it's reasonable certainty of no harm. So if there's reason to believe that an ingredient in food might harm somebody, then it really shouldn't be there in the first place. And we don't have a lot of options to, we can't really normally have warning labels put on ordinary foods just because an ingredient was in there that might not be safe for people. The idea is that it shouldn't be put there in the first place. So in terms of the pathways for CBD, it's not just us that's struggling with this question. Other jurisdictions are facing it as well. So the European Union and the United Kingdom are looking at CBD and evaluating it as a potential new food ingredient. The European Union earlier this year put those evaluations on hold because they found that there are too many safety questions and not enough data to address them. And they actually published a really nice review earlier this year that summarizes the hazard that they've encountered that have caused them to put this on hold. So far, these jurisdictions haven't had success getting CBD through their novel food pathways. A couple of other jurisdictions where there is regulated access to CBD under a certain framework are Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Australia and New Zealand have access to CBD products through their Medicines Authority, and Canada has oversight through their Cannabis Act, so through their essentially adult use pathway. So these are places where CBD products do have a pathway that they fit into, where there is some oversight. So with that, I'll pivot over to some miscellaneous topics. I did want to note that the food pathway has worked quite well for a cannabis constituent, namely hemp seeds. So hemp seeds are the FDA evaluated, generally recognized as safe food ingredient notices for dehulled hemp seed, for hemp seed protein powder, and for hemp seed oil. And so they can be a safe and nutritious food. And incidentally, this was concluded the day that the Farm Bill was signed in 2018, which we announced here. Now, delta-8 THC and generally speaking, intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoids are a growing concern, and I would say that's an understatement. The proliferation of these intoxicating compounds that have been derived from CBD and by many opinions are not scheduled. This is something that's really exploded, and there's not much we know about these. We know that they're intoxicating. We know, just if you look at the media, that people are having really bad adverse outcomes, that including death from these things. And so these are naturally a very large concern for us, and this has been evolving extremely quickly. So we're doing what we can in the short amount of time that we have that this is unfolded. We've issued this public health alert here on our website, and we've issued warning letters to some companies that are illegally selling these products. But of course, we can only act on products that are in our jurisdiction, that are in our product categories. So we've sent warning letters to foods, to firms selling foods with delta-8 THC added, as well as drug products. Also, we're really concerned about people eating cannabinoids unintentionally and by children. And so this copycat product phenomenon where recognizable brands are being sold not by those companies that manufacture those products that have intoxicating cannabinoids in them. This is really concerning, and a lot of these products have been behind some of the severe adverse events that we've become aware of. So this is a major issue. We wanted to get the word out, and therefore we have this material on our website. And I'll just cover this quickly for those of you who may have been aware. We had a meeting of the FDA Science Board earlier this year, and we wanted to talk to them and get their opinion about challenges that are related to ingredients that people want to put in food and supplements or what have you, any pathway, where people are taking them to achieve a pharmacological effect, sometimes perceptible, and that maybe they'll take as much as they need to get that feeling or what they're seeking. And that challenges some of the risk management approaches that are available in some of the more customary product pathways. Let's see. So we asked them a series of questions, and one is, when people are using a substance like this, what type of risk assessment tools might be used? How would we evaluate the safety for something that's very, very bioactive, right? More than just a typical preservative in a food, let's say, and so on. We also asked them questions about risk management options. So what types of, and this isn't really for the FDA specifically, this is just for society. What is society? What could benefit society for substances like cannabinoids to manage the fact that these things aren't totally benign, and what kind of tools could people benefit from? What kind of particular marketing rules or labeling, let's say. There's a lot of potential options out there. And so we're interested in what the Science Board will have to say about that. And they've expressed interest in forming a subcommittee to look at these questions more deeply. We have resources available on our website, which it's kind of a one-stop shopping for all of our resources, which I'd encourage you to check out. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Woodcock to conclude the presentation.
Thanks, Patrick. And I'll just talk a little bit about marijuana scheduling review, which I know is of great interest. On October 6th, the President asked the Secretary of HHS and the Attorney General to initiate the administrative process that we have to review how marijuana is scheduled under federal law. Under the CSA, we provide a scheduling recommendation to the DEA. And I see some people ask about when we're going to start writing a regulation. We don't do that. We do what's called an 8-factor analysis, which includes an assessment of abuse potential and whether there's a currently accepted medical use in the United States. And our Center for Drug Evaluation leads that process, but we are going to be working with the Assistant Secretary for Health Office and the NIDA, whom we always work with. And actually, the Assistant Secretary for Health has the final word on this recommendation, delegated from the Secretary. And we'll certainly apply public health considerations, but the DEA has the final word on scheduling decisions. And so in conclusion, we do play an important role in regulation and development of certain cannabis products, but right now, some are outside our jurisdiction. And I see some questions in the chat. I will answer those. We continue to support rigorous scientific testing and submission of new drug applications for people who want to follow a drug pathway, and also robust scientific research on cannabis products that are not following the drug pathway. We face some challenges, such as we understand there's a broad and disparate set of legal frameworks between federal, state, and local. As Patrick said, the market is rapidly evolving, and conversion of, say, CBD to multiple derivatives is chemically not difficult and is being accomplished by multiple parties who are then marketing these products. There's a very large market of CBD products that don't have a really formal regulatory place. There are challenges, as Patrick has gone over, with the existing pathways that people would like to use potentially. And then we get the rising public health risk with intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoids that are not scheduled right now, or do not appear to be scheduled at least. And we're committed to do our regulatory job in protecting and promoting public health. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the moderators, and I'm happy to run through a lot of questions, as I said, and answer questions. Patrick and I can do that.
Yeah, Dr. Woodcock, maybe I could start us off with just one of the questions that I've got from this that we sort of talked about earlier. Could you explain some of the ways in which the FDA often finds its hands tied, I think for lack of a better term, when it comes to communicating about cannabis regulation? And when you're talking about pre-decisional, can you just explain for the audience what that means from the standpoint of the FDA?
Sure. Well, right now, as everyone knows, and I think the President's announcement reflects the fact that we're in kind of a very unusual situation where cannabis, as defined in the Farm Bill, is in Schedule 1 of the CSA, and yet is legal in many states and is being freely sold both for medical use and recreational use. And so this is quite a disparity. This isn't, we're going to work on the scheduling issue as requested, but we don't have the sole, say on how all this, if anything, would be changed and so forth. Similarly with the other cannabinoids that are not and that are no longer under, or appear no longer to be under the Controlled Substance Act according to the Farm Bill, we can't say definitively what we're going to do. That's what pre-decisional means. When we announce what we're going to do, it'll be an announcement that'll be given to the whole public, and we will make everything clear. But until that point, until we've achieved that point, we can't talk about our further steps. And I know that's frustrating to people when they feel it's been a long time. But as I said, I believe in taking on problems and trying to resolve them. And that is what we are trying to do very diligently, is to resolve this issue and at least, get more clarity for everyone.
Yeah, and I'll underscore Dr. Woodcock's point there, that there's rules that we have to, I think a lot of regulated industry, sees the FDA and appreciates some of what we do and finds maybe some of what we do frustrating because, we limit certain people's activities. Our activities are very limited as well. We have a lot of rules about what we can and can't say and in what order and at what time. And so we have to be really mindful of being fair and not sharing information selectively, and also going through a careful, deliberative process before decisions are made. And when the time comes and decisions are made, then we communicate them broadly to the whole public at the same time. So we have to abide by that type of process.
Dr. Conway, one of the processes that you talked about that you're engaged in now is information gathering and literature review. So could you talk about what type of information would be helpful for the FDA to have as you move forward here? And Dr. Woodcock, please jump in as well. But a lot of people in the industry have a lot of information. They've done a lot of work and studies and reports and whatnot. What's helpful and how does that get transmitted to you in an effective way?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So this is definitely something I've heard a lot of. When we initially set out and formed the CBD policy working group, one of our big messages was we need more data, and the industry has been eager to provide data. What we found is quite a lot of scientific information is out there. And I think what the real question is not what data can people obtain, is what is the purpose of the data? Is CBD safe enough for what? Is it safe enough for someone to ingest because they find that it helps them with their sleep and will be using it voluntarily in an informed way? Or is it safe enough to put in cookies that people will eat every day, day in, day out, or in such a way that children might eat it? And that is related to the very strict safety standard that we have for substances added to food. And so I think that there's a lot of different use scenarios, and how much data is needed to justify the safety under use under those different scenarios is really the ultimate question. And so we always look at the data, the pool of data that's available with respect to what are we trying to answer with those data. And so we've looked at, is CBD safe enough to put into conventional foods and meet that really, really strict safety standard? Some have said, well, maybe can you just put a little bit in, like 1 milligram per food item or something like that. And so people are really trying to squeeze it in. And all we can say right now is that's a really strict safety standard. There's a lot of studies out there that are raising red flags, and that puts us in a difficult position. And I think that takes us to where what we presented to the science board. I think that's really what we were expressing there, is that we see challenges here. A lot of data that has come to us is things to the effect of, we provided CBD to to a group of panelists or test users, and generally they tolerated it pretty well. They didn't see overt short-term adverse effects. That's important information, but it's not the type of information that we would typically use, let's say, in a food ingredient evaluation, where we're looking for much more exaggerated doses, typically in animal studies that are very long-term, especially with something that has these types of toxicological concerns like CBD does. So I know that's a very long answer, but it's not so simple as, what data do you need? We'll provide it, and then let's move on. It's really about the context, what's the standard, and how is it being used.
And Patrick, maybe you could talk a little bit more about that in relation to real world evidence too, and how that's sort of distinctly different from what you're looking at when you're talking about evidence that's required here.
Yeah, exactly. In a normal food ingredient safety assessment, human data actually doesn't really factor in at all. Normally, we wouldn't want to be seeing if people get hurt by a substance added to food. And so the paradigm is really based on animal studies that are fed exaggerated doses of a chemical. The real world data can be informative and can play an important role in a broader public health paradigm where we have, let's say, a lower standard, or people are trying things out on their own. And I think the state regulated marijuana cannabis markets, this is an area where there is a lot of usage that has the potential to cause health impacts. And so real world data can be really helpful. So we basically have a form of experiment that's going on out there in the world. And so it's just a matter of, again, what is the context, what is the need, and then that will dictate what's the most useful data for a situation.
We've had a couple of questions on the relationship between FDA and DEA in terms of scheduling or rescheduling and the president's announcement. Can you unpack that a little bit more? What's your role as FDA? What's DEA's role? And how are you working together to get it right?
Well, we do the scientific and medical assessment, and then NIDA weighs in on that as well. That is the 8-factor analysis that we transmit to the Assistant Secretary for Health, because it's really the HHS Secretary that is responsible for transmitting a recommendation to DEA. Now, DEA then would propose a do a Federal Register notice and go through a formal process with comment about rescheduling. And yes, somebody asked in the chat, are we binding? They're not allowed to second guess our scientific or medical assessment. The DEA is not supposed to do that, nor I think would they want to, because we're the scientific and medical folks and they're the law enforcement folks. But the Controlled Substance Act is DEA statute, and they implement that statute. FDA, HHS does not. I had offered to go through some of these questions quickly. I could see there are a lot of misconceptions that people have. It might be useful just to quickly go through, if that's okay.
Yeah, we've got about 8 minutes left, 7. So if you want to hit some pieces that we've seen in the chat, go for it. And Dr. Cornway, if you want to weigh in as well, that'd be great.
All right. Well, let me see here. There's they said, well, cannabis, and I had already addressed this, it's legal in 37 states, it's widely available on the market, and so for, in the non-regular market. So what do we think about a federal regulation by a government agency? That's up to Congress. Right now, they left in the Farm Bill, they left cannabis itself is defined as greater than 0.3% THC. It's just in the Controlled Substance Act, and it is there, and there is no other regulatory agency over cannabis. It's certainly possible that, and people ask this, that different cannabis products or cannabis itself could go through the drug development process. That is possible. But it has to go through the pathway that I laid out. Can't be just testimonials or real-world evidence or something. It's a rigorous pathway. People ask about the other components, and for example, somebody asked, why can't inhaled, I suppose, cannabis go through the tobacco regulation? That's because only tobacco and synthetic nicotine are subject to that pathway. cannabis products are not subject under the law to the tobacco regulation pathway, so they can't go through that. Now, the other products, the hemp products, all the cannabinoids, other than what's defined by the Farm Bill as cannabis, all of those could have INDs and have studies and so forth, because they, by definition, are not cannabis, which is the product that's still under the Controlled Substance Act. So I hope that was clear. It's complicated. We're trying to, we're trying to explain all of this. And somebody asked, would we consider botanical cannabis as an approved drug? Well, if it met the criteria that we have in the botanical guidance and the cannabis guidance as far as control of the ingredients and so forth, and then it went through the drug development pathway and demonstrated a use, yes, I don't think FDA has any particular feeling about that one way or another. Now, one commenter asked, we're asking that we need more data. Why do we need more data? Well, we're not saying we need more data on everything. What we're saying is we need to get to a decision, which is different. We do need more data on these new cannabinoids because they're just coming out. And so we may have people who say they're 10 times more potent, or we have advertisements saying they keep you high longer. We don't really know these things. They're just testimonials and advertising, right? And we're going to have to find out, as well as what the other effects of these compounds are. They're chemically modified CBD. They're very closely related to THC also, but we know for drug development that, you can make many sort of minor tweaks on a molecule and change its binding to the receptor, its absorption, its excretion, and so forth. So, for those, we do need more information, but I think we have a fair amount of information on CBD. And yes, we are saying that what we've seen in animal studies is CBD may have hepatotoxicity. As Patrick said, we're talking about chronic use here of higher doses. We're not talking about acute toxicity, and that confuses the public because they think if you don't, have an acute reaction, then something is safe. But that the most concerning to me is the male reprotoxicity. And somebody asked, well, what about female reprotox? Why aren't we talking about that? Because we haven't seen as much, right? We've seen male reprotox. Those two reproductive systems are different, but we certainly have evaluated in the same kind of studies female reproductive toxicity.
And there is some evidence there as well. It just hasn't jumped out quite as much yet. And I also wanted to take this opportunity. I saw a question saying animals do not speak. How can I get feedback on the effect of CBD? We need human studies. And that really relates to what's the purpose of the study. The power of animal studies is you can feed much higher doses, exaggerated doses, over their whole lifetime, and then just dissect their bodies. And you can do that within a short period of time relative to a human life. And that's what's revealed a whole lot of what we know about the toxicological endpoints of CBD. And then that gives you hypotheses that you can then go explore in humans. It's really an ethical thing. It's a power of the experiment thing with the higher doses and so on. So there's a lot that human studies can offer that animal studies can offer that human studies can't.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, another question. Go ahead. Oh, go ahead. No. Sorry.
Keep talking.
Well, another question was if we had a clinical trial within an IND, what about CBD, even if it's derived from hemp, would that be Schedule I? No, according to the CSA, as we have tried to explain, all this is complicated. If it didn't have much THC in it, it wouldn't be scheduled.
Well, thank you, Dr. Woodcock. Just as a quick final question for both of you, is FDA open to working with us in the future as a lot of these important decisions are made?
Well, we feel that, we're going to really need a tremendous amount of stakeholder engagement once, we're getting in a direction. And definitely, obviously, we're going to work with the states very closely and also all the groups, the industry groups, the other stakeholder groups, the advocacy groups on all sides of the questions to arrive at, appropriate conclusions. But, we've gathered all this information together, as some of the commenters said, and now, we really would like to get a direction established.
Terrific. Well, I want to thank both our presenters, Dr. Woodcock and Dr. Cornwallis. Thank you, Sherry, for the wonderful introduction. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Our next webinar will be held on Thursday, December 1st at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern. It's just a week after Thanksgiving. And we'll have a panel of experts joining us to talk about the media hype around cannabis use disorder and psychosis. So you want to catch that one. And I do understand that we had about 50 questions that we did not get to. I want the audience to understand all of those questions will be provided to our presenters today. And we're going to invite them back for another round that's less focused on process and more on some of the questions that you all have raised today, both in the chat and ahead of time. So, Sarah?
Yeah, we certainly hope this is the first of many conversations with FDA, and I just want to personally thank our guests for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure, and we learned a lot. As Jack mentioned, our next webinar is going to be Thursday, December 1st, and you can go to www.uscfcr.org/events for more information. Pre-registration for that webinar will open in about a week. Also, a video copy of today's webinar will be posted on the CFCR YouTube channel. And again, you can go to uscfcr.org to get the link to that. That'll be available probably early part of next week. And you can also, we'll have a copy of the PDF available of the presentation that our guests from the FDA made. And I just want to, again, thank everybody for joining us today. And Jack, final word?
Be a short survey when you close out. If you take that, we'd be very much appreciative so we could continue to improve these webinars. Thank you all.
Thank you.